Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Basically Biblical. Thank you for joining me again this beginning of the Sabbath, and remember that we were talking about the names of Jesus and God, and we began by talking about the various titles and names found in the New Testament or in other places of the Bible, except that we were focusing on the names and titles found throughout the Bible. Now we're going to focus primarily on those names found in the Old Testament, and typically those are in Hebrew, or we will discuss them in the English translation of the Hebrew, and in some cases even using the translations from Aramaic. So we will begin by looking at El, which is probably one that you have heard of before. Maybe you have heard it used with another name. As we will mention throughout this episode and tomorrow's episode, many of the names in Hebrew do include the prefix or the beginning El. And El means God. It means a mighty God, a prominent God. And it can be found over 250 times in the Old Testament. And we'll discuss some of those scriptures tomorrow. Also, you can find the Elah, which is Aramaic, also for God, and Elah, which appears in Hebrew, in the Hebrew Bible. And some of those words, like Elah, is the Aramaic, and it is plural. So we will talk about El more tomorrow, and then the next word for Jesus, or name for God, we will look at is Elohim. And you probably might be familiar with that word. It is a noun, and it usually refers to more than two, and used with a single verb or a singular verb. Elohim actually occurs more than 2,500 times in the Old Testament. I promise we won't look at all of those scriptures, but primarily it speaks of God as creator, God as preserver, God as mighty and strong. Then next we will review El Shaddai, God Almighty, or God All-Sufficient. Now, isn't that nice? God Almighty and God All-Sufficient. El Shaddai, God All-Sufficient. And it appears only 48 times in the Old Testament, but I don't think that just because it appears 48 times and not 2,500 times, that it makes it any less important or significant. Further, we will review Adonai. This word means Lord in English Bibles, and usually is the capital L, Lord, when we speak of Lord, like a master. And it appears about 300 times in the Old Testament, and is always plural when referring to God, especially when there's a reference to God as like the human Lord. Sometimes refers to men, or the first use of Adonai we find in Genesis, Exodus, and Judges, and there's a heavy use in Isaiah on Adonai, Jehovah. So we'll further review those scriptures associated with Adonai. And then, of course, the all-familiar Jehovah or Jehovah also means Lord in the English Bibles, but Yahweh is the covenant name of God. And this name appears over 6,800 times. Wow. And one of the first times is in Genesis 2 and 4. Yahweh Elohim. Yahweh Elohim. From the verb to be, hava, and to live, chava, and it focuses on his sovereignty, his being the supreme God, the self-existent one. I am who I am. And we will expand further on that explanation or definition, the meaning of Jehovah on tomorrow. Please join me tomorrow, and remember that our Saturday episodes are at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and during those episodes we are live, and that means that you can submit your chat comments or chat questions, and I will be happy to entertain those, and I look forward to meeting you here tomorrow at 3 p.m. Saturday for our standard episode of Basically Biblical. Until then, have a blessed evening. Bye-bye.